I gotta do an addendum vid. You know how these go. But anyway, going over the paratrooper motorcycles. I'm not. This is kind of cool. The idea of like a little motorcycle. They had an even smaller one that looked like something you like one of your neighbors who's like a delinquent would have been driving around Brooklyn. Remember those? You see some cool. The coolest one I saw it was in Baltimore recently, but like I said, I'm not into the motorcycles. Like this, okay, this, all right. Granddad Frank was my D-Day hero. Says veteran, this poor bastard. You know this happened in Iraq or Afghanistan. Remember Lee Rigby? Remember he didn't die in Afghanistan, did he? He didn't die in Iraq, did he? Anyway, everyone forgets that. Man, I hate seeing this, man. I hate seeing this. And I'm not even going to go over all the reasons why, but my granddad had nightmares and would cry at night. Right. Yeah. My grandfather, I told you, my grandfather was on the Eastern Front. He used to do that too. He used to do that too, even into his 90s. Anyway, yeah. He's proud of his grandfather's service. I'm not. I don't want to say anymore. What are you gonna do? You're in the military. You're gonna fight. You know what? I don't want to take. I don't want to take away the guy's. Thinking that it was worth the cost because in my opinion, it was less than worth the cost of what they've done. These sons of bitches in the last, 20 years. But whatever. You know what? You want to be patriotic. You want, I'm in between. I'm not. You know what I mean? So this is not my country, but these guys. I mean, side by side with the Americans, they're always this guy. Yeah. Anyway, enough with his sentimentality. You must purge it from your soul. Right? No, anyway, look at that cool tank, man. They're looking once again more the DD Valentines. Good job. You got some of these, and this is a training operation with some of these sank, and they left the suckers at the bottom, right? So this is actually a underwater shot of one of these things lost during the training. Where, like I said, right, 7 of the tanks sank, and despite the escape training, 6 crew members were drowned. Jeez. So at least they put a thing to commemorate them at the site, which I think is overlooking the bay. I think that's pretty. Oh, my sentimentality again. So, I've been a very bad Nietzsche, and I haven't really done as well as I'd like in that department. But now you got like these armored cars. I mean, you got all these cool armored cars. The British had, when you get into this, and then the whole thing with this magazine too. This is a magazine for collectors. There's a historical stuff, but it's for collectors. So you have guys who also specialize in refitting. There's a lot of cool like restoration projects going on of a lot of these vehicles by these very talented mechanics. A lot of them also they do it part time. It's just like all the other magazines. It's for the history. Most of these guys are former military guys in the British military. So I like this too. Right, crews use the smoke dispensers to hide cans of beer. I love that's great. I can see that. It's like hide some beer in there. Awesome. So now this is the main reason. This is one of the reasons I bought this. It was some of these photos I had never seen these photos. Of course, the most influential tank design. Okay, on the now dying, obsolete armored vehicle called the tank, right? Until something else happens, right? The Renault, the 2-man tank. Of course, the U.S. Did I go? I forgot if I had gone over the Army, the Armored Corps of America that was founded in World War One. They had the heavy tank division, which was of course the Mark IVs, and the light tank division, which Patton was a part of, where they had the light 2-man Renault tanks, which were more reliable. Okay? And so just like some of like this photo right here, like this photo is what made me in the end say, yeah, I'll spend some of my money here. Interesting photo. This is a plant in Van Dorn Ironworks. This is in Cleveland. So look at the guys, the mustache Pete's. Look at them working on the turrets, right? And the turret, America was licensed to make these. The French Renault licensed the Americans to be allowed to make these. And this is the welded, well, not welded, the riveted plates. It would take 8 plates, separate plates, to make up the turret. So yeah, I'm sorry what happened to Cleveland, guys. So isn't that the whole story? And this is cool too. You see them in different forms. I like how they're being tested, right? Being tested on a massive pile of tracks. Just in these mud things. I was like, all right, without the turrets yet. I just thought it was a cool thing, and of course, there's one in Carlisle where they have it, which is kind of cool to see these tanks. Um, and remember, these things. I mean, they found these when America on a successful mission in Afghanistan, the home of the heroes. They still are finding these things, being used. I don't think the Taliban used them, but that's kind of cool. And of course, this is what America does with its thing. It just throws them in the scrapyard. And Maryland, look at that. So interesting. But I'll round this out with, okay, this one. Everyone forgets. And this is, I don't know if anyone out there, if you're in the comments, I could probably look it up real quick, but I remember on VHS there was a Vietnam War film about the Australians in Vietnam. Remember that one? It was a film. Everyone forgets that. Of course, the UK dipped out of that. Good for them, but the Australians, I guess, decided they were going to help the Yanks in that stupid war. And of course, they had the Centurion. Now, the Centurion tank, man. Let me tell you, bro. The British had finally made, like, this was the tank that was made to, like, take on the Tigers and whatnot. What an adaptable tank. Okay, I mean, it looks like a thoroughly modern tank. Well, this was built in 1945. It didn't get to see action really in the war that it was designed for, but you saw these suckers for the Cold War period being used, by everybody. Of course, the Israelis used them in the wars they had. But also the Australians are using them here. But also I'm going to mention as a segue, the South Africans use these very modifiable tank as well. They use these, they call it the elephant or the oliphant. But more on that later. But, this is just going over what happened in Vietnam. So, and you see some of General Westmoreland, look at this. So these are some of the Australians. Tough sons of bitches, the Australians. They had some really nasty fights. They didn't have too many casualties though, and it was interesting how people thought that this tank, right, the Canberra Times, isn't that the capital of Australia? You think I would know? How much can I know, right? Is it much more difficult to imagine what use will be found for the squadron of Centurion tanks? These tanks were designed for desert warfare, too heavy and cumbersome for fighting in the jungle. Well, actually, here they were actually very successful in here fighting the Vietnamese. North Vietnamese, and also you're going to see later in South Africa, these things were very effective in jungle fighting. So, which is all useless, right? Because what was it all for? Right? This war, the war I'm going to go over in South Africa, the border war. But like I said, it's interesting photos. And that film, I got to find that film, man. I remember the scene in it where the Americans are there and they're like, hey, Australians, they have a bet. They have a fight where the Americans have a scorpion and the Australians have a tarantula or a large spider. And they decide to put it in a bucket and have a fight. Of course, they're betting money on it. And of course, I mean, the tarantula is outmatched by the scorpion. The scorpion has armor. And it has a much better, longer reach weapon called the Stinger, and then the Australians get pissed and they start, and the Americans and them getting a big brawl. I thought it was kind of funny, that film. So, oh yeah, and this one, of course, the model right there, see model Tamiya. Oh man, the Japanese, man. You could say that is the model country, right? In terms of making the models, the Japanese love these things. They were such high quality ones. Although the Chinese are pretty good at that as well. And the thing with the Cromwell, right? The Cromwell, this is basically the successor of the cruiser tanks. I like the cruiser tanks. The crews didn't like them, but I thought they looked cool. As they were getting knocked out left and right in North Africa. These were kind of reliable, unlike those tanks. Okay, but like I said, it's ironic that the armor and the armament on this was still not sufficient, or at least not sufficient for when it ran into, like, I don't know, Michael Vittman's Tiger, which destroyed like 6 cities in like 10 minutes or something to that effect. The armor nerds are gonna get me on the numbers, but you all know about that battle. I always thought it was interesting that, because what does this look like to you? This looks like a British version of a Tiger tank, like a Tiger tank's little nephew. I always thought that was fascinating how it looked like that, and that it wasn't more effective because it, like I said, it looks like a Tiger. So, and like I said, and just rounding it out, you have all this. This is where, like, these guys, they really take a lot. I gotta give them credit. They refurbish these things. They make the engines. Of course, everything can't be exactly the same. A lot of the parts are not made anymore, so they have to sometimes do modifications using stuff that wouldn't have been in the tanks, kind of keeping it inside. Obviously, the outsides, you want the things to be as accurate as possible, but they're doing what they can. So, and I always think that's very, even if it's not something that that I'm too familiar with. I could change a tire. Trust me, I could do a lot of things, but this is getting into the real gearhead stuff, particularly for stuff that is not made anymore. You have to go by manuals, or there has to be a resource separate because they don't really make these anymore. Yeah. And that was military vehicles. Just rounded out. Next issue is cool. They got the first. I think the first Soviet self-propelled gun here, but look at all this, man. It's all scrapped. That's why you don't have tons of German vehicles left. And the idea of the IS-3, I like this one just real quick. The real ugly, crazy, over-the-top Western tanks and tank destroyers they made to deal with the Soviet tanks, particularly the IS-3, right? The Joseph Stalin 3. And the first time you saw them, the war was already over. They were in a big shock. The anti-tank guns could not penetrate the IS-3's thick armor. So they started making like these ridiculous things to counter the IS-3. It was an arm with a 183 millimeter gun. More millimeters is better, right? Hesh rounds, right? So they made all these things. Meanwhile, the JS-3 was like a dead end. I mean, the Soviets didn't want to make any more of these tanks. It was a cool tank, though, looking tank. But like these things were sort of a dead end, and then the Soviets decided, let's make the ugly fucking tanks, and the Western Allies said, we'll do you one better. We'll make even uglier tanks. Why am I talking about aesthetics? I don't know. But Tank Museum in Bovington. If I did go to the UK ever, that's where I'd want to go. Go to Bovington, Dorset. See these things. Go to a pub. Nowhere near the cities, but I guess I'd have to land in the city, wouldn't I? So anyway, great magazine. Like I said, don't normally get it, but there was enough in here I thought was interesting. Whether you think that's interesting, I guess I'll find out. So it's all gonna fade. The demographics are gonna decide that. But what was, it still exists. It still lives, right? History's a living thing.